And Kayla can call the roll.
Thank you, Linda. Diane. So I have received regrets from the following Transportation Commission members that are unable to join us this evening. Commissioner Stoltz is out of town, and Commissioner Demetrio is attending a Board of Education meeting. Please, so for the remaining commissioners, please say here when your name is called. Commissioner Felt.
Here.
Commissioner Fern.
Here.
Commissioner Gordon.
Here.
Commissioner Guru Raja.
Here.
Commissioner Hull.
Here.
Commissioner Nahidi.
Here.
Commissioner Preston.
Here.
Commissioner Parsons.
Here.
Councilmember Smith.
Present.
Commissioner Trudeau.
Here.
Commissioner Dolan.
Here.
Commissioner Riegstad. Sergeant Bill Clock.
Here.
Commissioner Cooper.
Here.
Commissioner Lazarus.
Here.
Commissioner Liu.
Here.
We have a quorum. A
Thank you.
couple of quick announcements, just that CTN let me know, I think the mics are not amplifying as they normally do, but that the sound is being picked up to feed into the recording for viewers at home. So please make sure that you do still turn your mic on and off when you're speaking so that it gets fed into the system for the recording. And Mr. Lazarus also has a quick announcement for us related to the A2B Safe campaign.
Thank you. You'll have, those who are observant will have noticed we have replaced the posters on the front of the dais with a wanted poster. And what we would like as part of the A2B Safe campaign is your ideas about us is provided on the poster. If you go to a2gov.org/be safe by December 10th and give us your ideas, they will be featured on a poster in the future. Also related, while you are strolling through the A2Gov website, there's also an opportunity to sign up for the first ever Citizens Academy, which will be held in the spring. And I encourage all who want to learn more about their city government and how to be active to sign up for that. It'll be interesting, it'll be fun, and it'll give a chance to continue to have local government as a participant sport.
All right. We have an agenda. Any additions or corrections to the agenda? Then I'll take a motion to approve. Say your name while you do that, please.
Trudeau.
Trudeau, seconded by
Smith.
Smith. All right. All in favor? Aye. Any opposed? Any abstentions? All right, we have an agenda. And at this time, we have public comment. And if you'd like to speak to us, you've got 3 minutes to do that, and Kayla will keep the time for us. So is there anybody who would like to sign in and speak?
Hello. I've already signed in. My name is Erica Briggs, and I am a board member of the Washington Bicycling and Walking Coalition, currently serving as vice chair. And I'm here tonight to ask you to give your stamp of approval to the ARbor's pedestrian ordinance. We were excited to see the engineering review come out, and we're hopeful that that can finally set aside the debate about ARbor's ordinance and whether it's appropriate or not. So I'm sure you've all read it, but just to highlight a few passages that we liked. This ordinance formalizes existing expectations for driver behavior. It is found that the requirements for driving, Tool Design Group found that the requirements for driver yielding behavior at crosswalks encoded in ARbor's crosswalk ordinance is within the range of regional variation in norms and practices, and it is consistent with driver instruction in Michigan. And finally, it is a reasonable contribution towards ARbor's efforts to advance walkability and pedestrian safety. So I see no reason not to endorse that. But unfortunately, all too often we've seen that we've wasted a lot of time around debating whether or not this ordinance is actually the merits of the ordinance, and rather than addressing sort of the real issue, how do we make sure that walking in Ann Arbor is safe and easy? So the ordinance was meant to do one thing and one thing only, and that was to enable enforcement, and it's done that. We know that enforcement is one of the 5 essential E's, the other being education, encouragement, engineering, and evaluation, which you guys have just done as well. So what we're asking for the city to do is to start working towards meeting council's Vision Zero goal of 0 traffic fatalities by 2025. Stop debating the ordinance and begin the serious work of determining how we achieve this ambitious but really critical goal. So I've passed around a 9 components of a strong Vision Zero commitment. You may have seen this, you may have not, but I think it's a good reference document. So just to highlight a couple of issues that we think are particularly important, and also just to review what Vision Zero is for those who may not be familiar with it. It's a strategy to eliminate all traffic fatalities and serious injuries. And that's done, it's a strategy. So we do that by reducing driver speeds, implementing meaningful behavior change campaigns, which the city's also been working on, and enhancing data-driven traffic enforcement. So just to stress that data-driven component, part of this request from the city was to start pulling together data on these traffic fatalities. And you can see what's in front of you actually isn't that meaningful yet. It can't be broken down, and that's a problem. We need to be looking at these, what these crashes are, and looking at them in a meaningful way. You know that there's 411 pedestrian accidents since this pedestrian ordinance has been in place, but we don't know, were they at crosswalks? Were they at, due to left-hand turning movements? The last analysis of this that I'm aware of was done by WBWC, and we pinpointed that actually left-hand turning movements were a critical area that need to be worked on and education needs to be around. But we need to be looking at this and trying to figure out what sort of crashes are happening. And then the other piece that we wanted to highlight was the systems-based approach. As the handout notes, we need to focus on the built environment, systems, and policies that influence behavior. Just one last thing. I'd like to push back on staff's comment that the only way to reach the 77,000 commuters is through an expensive and sustained media campaign. The best way to reach these commuters is to have our built environment direct them the way that we want them to behave. Thanks.
Is there someone else who'd like to sign in and speak?
Good evening. Actually, it's kind of crummy out, but good evening anyway. Clark Chernesky is my name, and I live at 2646 Traver Boulevard in Ann Arbor. Just want to mention a couple things, especially about Amtrak. It was announced this week that 88 new cars are on order now for the Midwest. These will begin to arrive in about a year. And they're similar to the cars that were built by Siemens for the Bright Line, which is a new railroad, passenger railroad, starting up from Miami to Orlando. The first phase of that is to start pretty soon, so it's the latest thing. One thing that is especially interesting with these cars is that the width of the doors between cars and the width of the aisles are large enough that the entire train is accessible to somebody using a wheelchair. This is, I think, the first for the United States. They'll also have all the latest amenities. I still see comments in the MLive, for example, people saying that the ridership on Amtrak has dropped. The ridership for 2016 did drop because of the heavy construction going on for the track and the signal systems. However, since this work is now pretty much done, if you look at the summer months, main construction months, June, July, and August, the ridership for 2016 was 26,000 in Ann Arbor. These are Ann Arbor statistics. And this year is 39,000. So that's an increase of 50% over last year. And it's an increase of 10% over 2 years ago, before the heavy construction started. So the ridership has come back and then some. And for September, ridership in Ann Arbor went from 8,000 last year to 11,500 this year for September, an increase of 40%. And if you look at, for 2 years ago, an increase of 15%. So we're on our way back. Also, Amtrak has done some work at the local station here, some kind of cleanup, fix-up work, so it taking a little bit of the edge of this age off of it, but it still needs replacement. It is still too small for what's needed. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Is there anybody else who'd like to speak?
Hello, everyone. Dear members of the Transportation Commission, my name is David Schinnebarger, and I'd like to personally thank you, first of all, for being here and for your time. Now, I'm here to advocate for a city of the future. I'm here to advocate for a city where cars are not a top priority, but people are. When my wife and I moved to Ann Arbor, we, like many young people, were looking to live in a city where we could safely get around by walking and biking. Like many young professionals and competitive companies, we sought out a vibrant city where it was safe to walk and bike to work. We picked Ann Arbor. Now, as a community, Ann Arbor has already adopted Vision Zero goals in order to continue making Ann Arbor a safer community for all. That means zero traffic fatalities, zero. As it currently stands, I'm sure you can all think of them, there are a plethora of dangerous crosswalks throughout our city, some more dangerous than others, and fast roads going through our city. I personally believe that the crosswalk ordinance makes it safer for people of all ages and abilities to safely cross the road. I also believe that removing the crosswalk ordinance would put our most vulnerable users' lives in danger. I'm also, like Erica, involved with the Washtenaw Biking and Walking Coalition, where the consensus is the same. Removing this ordinance endangers lives. If that's not enough, let's look at the last section of the engineering review that just was released this last Monday. The last few lines say, given the disparity in size and inertia between pedestrians and motor vehicles, expecting a pedestrian to fully enter the roadway before drivers are required to yield would put pedestrians at unnecessary risk. So there you have it. BWC, the Ann Arbor community, and even a third-party engineering group all agree the crosswalk ordinance is a small step in the right direction towards Vision Zero. I believe removing this ordinance would directly put lives at risk. I would hope that after this engineering research that this issue can finally be put to rest, and instead of a step backwards, we can focus on bigger leaps forwards and instead of these sort of small steps. Thank you.
Thank you. Can you sign in, please?
I did.
Oh, you did? Okay.
Yep.
Is there anyone else who'd like to speak? And no one else coming forward, so that closes public commentary. So we have minutes. Any additions or corrections to the minutes? Then I'll take a motion to approve. Okay, Lazarus, approving? Motion, okay.
I can't make a motion.
Okay.
I'll move it.
Trudeau,
Yep.
seconded by, okay. All in favor? Say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? We have minutes then. All right, next we have a short report from the Speed Reduction Committee. Are you doing that?
Okay.
Okay.
So we met 2 weeks ago on the Speed Reduction Committee. We have 3 remaining meetings before the holidays, November 17th, December 1st, and December 15th. All of them are from 11 to 12 in City Hall in Larkham First Floor North Conference Room. So they're public meetings. Anyone is welcome. Recently, when we met, we discussed with the city the updated speed map. We don't have an updated map of the exact speed limits, so we're trying to figure out anything that changed recently. We're looking to see if there are, how things went in example cities that did try a resolution such as this. For example, we understand that Seattle had a drive 25 I forget the exact slogan.
20 is plenty.
20 is plenty campaign. So we were looking to find out what was the result of this change in another city. We were wondering what kind of speed changes have been measured once gateway treatments were installed. Those seem like they've been working fairly well. We're interested in finding out how difficult it is to lobby the state for things like state-run roads like Washtenaw, where the speed is a problem, but it seems like difficult for the city to directly change it. And we debated things like, for example, in the current city climate, if you made the speed limit 25 everywhere, without any additional support for enforcement, it would be very difficult to actually create a situation where everyone was driving 25 regardless of what we made the speed limit. So the police said they had something in the order of 721 tickets backed up in the complaint box because there are so many people complaining about speeding on their road, and it's very difficult to get to them all with the limited resources. So in a situation like that, regardless of what the speed limit is, it's maybe difficult. And I'll finish. Okay. But on the other hand, if people are going slower when someone's hit, their likelihood of surviving or not having a very serious injury goes up. So we're trying to weigh those considerations against each other. But we have not come to any decision about what we plan to put in the plan.
Great. Thank you to you. Thank you to the committee.
Can I add one thing in terms of timeline for the speed
Oh,
reduction
right.
committee?
January?
Yeah. With the current timeline, they have 3 upcomings meeting that Stephanie went over the dates for those, and we expect that the committee will be able to report back to the full Transportation Commission at the January meeting with final recommendations from that committee. Looking for the commission to take action on those.
Great. Okay. The next up is the response to the ARbor crosswalk ordinance review. Here's what we have planned, is to give a chance for everyone on the commission to take about a minute, and really not much longer, to state sort of your position. Because of some technical difficulties last week, we couldn't get all of the written responses in advance, so we wanted to hear from everyone. This seemed like a good way to do it. And then the suggestion is to have perhaps 2 of us get together and summarize the opinion of the group and submit that to council. And Kayla has an update about submitting that to council.
Yeah, so the crosswalk review ordinance resolution had stated a deadline of December 18th. The next Transportation Commission meeting after tonight isn't until December 20th. So because the materials with the network being out last week and other coordination items, we weren't able to get you your materials for tonight's meeting until Monday. And if you did feel that you had enough time to review those and you want to make your final recommendations at tonight's meeting, you certainly can do that. We're not saying you can't, but this recommendation that we've offered to allow you to, perhaps a couple of you get together and create the final recommendations after today's meeting and then bring those to the December 20th Transportation Commission meeting for the commission to, you would all take action on those, and then those would go to City Council in January. So that's our recommendation that we would offer. We would then update City Council that at the December 18th meeting of the timeline that's in what we have in progress, that we don't have a final response from the Transportation Commission at that. Also, I wanted to just mention in your discussion tonight about the crosswalk ordinance, we do have a couple of the staff present who were involved in preparing the materials that you received with your agenda materials, the staff response to that resolution. So if you have questions about some of the responses that have been provided, that's why they're present here tonight, is to participate in some Q&A with the commission on that.
Which should happen after people make their comments?
I think
or-
it could happen at
Okay.
either time.
But we're trying to manage the time, so it'll be 30 minutes. Acceptable so far? And it's possible, and you can consider this as well, that Stephanie and I could be those two people to pull everything together. We certainly have an obvious opinion about this that you have in your packet, but we can be fair and include minority opinions or majority opinions that disagree with us as well. So that's just a suggestion, but if you want to be that person who does that work, you can also speak up afterwards. The better notes that we take on what people say, the more effective this will be. So if you want to take some notes and submit them to Kayla and I, then that would be helpful as well. But Stephanie and I, right now, will be doing that as well. So I thought we could just start at this end and work down. And do try and limit yourself to about a minute or less. So I can't see who's exactly at the very far end there.
Commissioner Cooper.
Okay, you want to start? You might have an opinion about this.
Well, I do have an opinion, and I have to preface what I say as a member of staff. Have been working in the community since 2005. We saw the initial ordinance language come forward about 2008. It was revised a few times. But over the course of the period, the city's been recognized as a gold level walk-friendly community based on some of the facts and factors. And I think that it was the WBWC that convened a pedestrian forum over at the DDA offices in 2007, raised our consciousness, even though we were a very walkable community that we had more to do. And this ordinance was one of the pieces of things to do. And it's been my pleasure. And it's, if you will, it's really with great enthusiasm that I come back to work every day in order to help to make this community more walkable, to build on the gold standard that we have, understanding that we haven't reached a place where we can rest on our laurels, and that I really value the opportunity I have to continue to work in the community with folks like on the commission and within the community to realize the vision that we have for a walkable, bikeable place. I'll stop there.
Thanks.
I got to be cautious with my opinion. It's I'm more on the enforcement side. I don't really set policy. I'm on the enforcement side of it. My fear with this ordinance is that it puts a sense of invincibility on the pedestrian. That's as an enforcement side. That's my fear. So whatever the commission decides, whatever the council decides, as staff, as the enforcement side, I will enforce that to my best of my ability. But that's the fear I have.
Great.
As a member of the engineering staff, I definitely value the impression that this ordinance give to the general population. It does stress the importance of yielding to pedestrians and non-motorized traffic. However, I've heard through my interaction with the population of concerns, but I try to stay on the engineering realm and analyze different conditions, whether it's mid-block, it's how the ordinance applies to mid-block, how the ordinance applies to unsignalized intersection, and provide the professional expertise on this matter.
Thank you.
I would like to see a day in Ann Arbor like I see throughout the western half of the country, where you scarcely even need to look across the road to see if there's a car coming or not. You just walk across crosswalks and you're perfectly safe. We are so far from that here. Having said that, in the last 10 years, there's been a huge improvement, and I view a lot of that due to this ordinance. Drivers generally are much more likely to stop than they were 5 or 6 years ago. There's no question about that. They're not good enough yet, but they're better. So there's no real reason why we should go back. I would just assume leave this in this ordinance exactly as is.
Yeah, I would say, I mean, I've experienced this being a frequent pedestrian and like not driving. I just, I will say it had the observance of the ordinance by drivers has definitely, it seems, improved, because I actually moved away around the time that this was adopted and moved back like a year ago, and I definitely have noticed a difference. Like, it used to be a lot more difficult, but I do think they need more like signage and education to make it clear. I think they have like amped it up for sure, like the last year or so, just these pedestrian studies they're doing. And I think though, I mean, it would be good to see, is there a way we can address this with signage? Because I know that the current signage says yield to pedestrians in crosswalk, which does not necessarily mean the curb. And just if there's some way to make it clearer that you should yield to people standing on the curb, that would be good, like with signage. And I do think installing the flashing beacons helps for sure, and other education campaigns with this. And I do think it would be good to like talk to like, yeah, our state legislators to see if they could advocate for something that would do something like this on a uniform basis, like, or at least improve what is done on the state level to make it more consistent. But yeah, I mean, I don't know that it's necessarily should go back at this point, now that we've already done what we've done, and feel like if we could educate people more, that would be, and improve the signage, that would be.
Okay, thank you.
I just want to say that after reading the engineering review, it confirmed what I already personally felt as I walked my son across crosswalks on the way to school. So I'm a firm supporter of the current language, and personally I think we can put that debate to rest. I have a couple small points to bring up. One is that the RRFB's map that was presented shows the blue indicators as completed fall 2017. I want to say that there's at least 4 or 5 that have not been completed at this point. So maybe an update on when Packard near Easy, Platt on the south side, Ellsworth, and then the 2 Fuller up by North Campus. Second thing is that I'm hoping to clarify bullet point 1 on the supplemental materials. There was a question about car pedestrian incidents in crosswalks, and the staff response was 411 total crashes with pedestrians involved. I think we need to clarify that that's just overall, not related to crosswalks, because it doesn't indicate that anywhere else there. Which also, this response I think is interesting in that there's no real data points to indicate where our problems are, and I think that one of the things that this commission can recommend is that staff be directed to analyze the data and not just pump out these big aggregate numbers. 2 more things. The curb ramp removal, I want to say that after reading those rationales, a lot of them made perfect sense. And from the conversations that I've had, a lot of people felt in the dark or weren't talked to about why their streets or their crosswalks were changing. And I think the city could go a long way in involving community members in deciding where their crosswalk goes in their neighborhood. I'm thinking of one crosswalk. It's not a crosswalk, it's a curb ramp that should be removed, because based on everything that is being removed so far, but it's where people cross, right? And it's the easiest, fastest, and safest solution that goes into a private driveway. Just real quick, the staff response about not having funding for education for the ordinance, I encourage the A2 Be Safe campaign to take on this ordinance for education. Thanks.
My comments are already submitted and available, so I don't want to use the time. I'm in support of the ordinance, but I feel like it's currently poorly implemented, which is what creates the greatest danger. So if we could improve implementation, education, enforcement, to come in line with the ordinance, then I think it could work.
Okay. I also submitted my comments, but I'll be a little bit more practical since that was a lot of opinion. I think the Washtenaw Biking and Walking Coalition was being a bit modest in their involvement in this ordinance, and that was a great deal of the work that made it happen. And we have 2 WBWC board members on this commission as well, which I think is a great representation to have. The Pedestrian Safety and Access Task Force did provide more details of where we think that the signage, presentation, education, that kind of thing should be stepped up. And some of those things have been done, but I think that's a great reference to go back, that we did endorse this ordinance quite strongly with some recommendations for how to make it even better. I think we need to continue to advocate for improvement, and the main point I made is that focusing on the ordinance itself is definitely looking in the wrong direction. I think we need to focus on the 70,000 people who come in every day and how to get them on board with the change in our culture, and also work with speed and distracted driving.
Yeah, I'm actually also very grateful that this ordinance exists in our city. I was happy when it came into existence. I was happy when it survived some of the political challenges, and I'm happy that we're getting a chance to weigh in mostly in support. I think that from personal experience, I lived and worked in an area and took the bus where I would use a crosswalk very often, and the ordinance, along with some of the RFBs, really made crossing more predictable. And I've noticed that to be the case in other places as well around the city. I think there are some areas where the ordinance isn't enough, and we need to go a little further. I'm not sure the exact solution, but they tend to be in areas where cars feel safe going fast already, because mostly it's the design of the street makes them feel like it's okay to go that fast. Sometimes it's a geography, topography thing, if it's a downhill and the crosswalk is near at the bottom of the hill. Sometimes it's the width of the lanes. But if we can think about ways where traffic calming along with this ordinance and other factors can help us achieve better pedestrian safety, that would be great. I think this ordinance takes us closer to, I think, a fundamental philosophical value that I have, and maybe all of us have perhaps, is that a human being has a right to walk, and I think we can build on that. Thanks.
Thanks.
I would start by saying I feel that I've had plenty of time to be prepared to put forward a recommendation this evening based on what this body thinks. What I will add to during my 60 seconds is I came into this process always willing to take a look at data to see if we should make changes. And I think that we have to always be looking at the information that we have to figure out if we're doing something the best way it can be done. I think what we see is that we don't collect enough data. We don't have enough information to justify walking back away from this. I wouldn't be comfortable putting forth a recommendation to walk away, to scrap this ordinance without much stronger data than we have. And so I'm fully in support of maintaining the ordinance as it is, giving council that recommendation, and then focusing on how to collect better data, how to implement this better, and how to move forward. I think that would be in the best interest of everybody in the community. And I just close, the last thing I'd say is, we're talking about people's lives here, and fundamentally, let's not forget that when you get a driver's license, you have to be prepared to deal with unpredictable things as a driver. You're responsible for that 2 tons of steel, and people seem to have forgotten that. And I think it is important for us to reinforce that, and we have a lot of work to do on the implementation side. But I think, certainly I'm prepared to move forward a recommendation to City Council this evening.
All right.
As far as the ordinance itself goes, I think it's totally fine that we establish an expectation of behavior for people driving in our city, and we shouldn't be afraid to lead by example. The engineering review, like Commissioner Parsons indicated, is like pretty much in line with what my own beliefs were, and I'm glad that that's been reinforced by taking a look at what we tell drivers when we teach them how to drive in our state. So again, I support the ordinance itself. I think it's a small piece of a much larger and more important project, but it's an important piece of that whole set of things. The recent successes with enforcing the ordinance, I think, have been illuminating, and other design components like the gateway treatments have really helped also educate people and change behavior. So I think, yeah, all of these things we're doing are moving things in the right direction, and pulling the ordinance out of this doesn't seem to really make sense to me. We should keep going in that direction and set that expectation, lead by example. I'll echo the point about the signage being confusing. The fact that it says in or at the crosswalk isn't consistent with the ordinance. Maybe there's an explanation for that that I haven't heard, but it's the only thing that I've been confused by in this whole process of change. But I'm more eager to see this conversation move along and get on to figuring out how we design our streets, as a lot of commissioners have said here. So I would also support moving this recommendation forward tonight if everybody else is amenable, as Commissioner Smith indicated. Thanks.
Thanks.
Well, I think there are some legitimate concerns from a safety perspective as far as pedestrians being maybe overly confident or drivers being overly reactionary, but I think it takes time for the community to adapt, and I've noticed, I think regardless of the wording, I think a lot of the new signage moves us in the right direction. It's certainly made me even more aware of where the crosswalks are, and I think that does a lot for the people who are driving in the city. And I think, the design element, sort of helping people sort of behave in a certain way through design, is going to be a key, rather than, I really think that's just going to dictate people's behavior. So, I think overall it takes a lot of time to create that cultural shift, but I feel like that's already begun. We're already moving through that process. And so stepping back from that, or moving away from the ordinance would be an unfortunate step back. So, thank you.
Great.
Well, I appreciate hearing from the other members about the history of the ordinance. That's, as a relatively renewed, citizen of Ann Arbor, as of the last few years, I didn't know the history went back as far as, almost 10 years, it sounds like. So that's important context to get, because, I think we've all heard, questions, concerns, praise for it, the mix of it. And for me, at least, it was removed from that context of, it seems like it's improved over time, as there has been time for the culture to shift, even if we're not where we want to be yet. To Sergeant Clark's point, I agree that, we allowing it to just rest on, we put the ordinance up, and letting the enforcement do the bulk of the work is setting us up for failure. So, I think that's where other pieces come in. The speed reduction committee, reducing speeds across town, because one of the common complaints I've heard is that drivers feel like they're caught between causing a rear-end collision, which is obviously minor compared to stopping for a pedestrian, and to Councilmember Smith's point, saving an injury. But at the same time, they're probably going too fast to really stop in time. So being able to take that part of the decision sort of, I guess, whatever, decreasing the risk, the significance of that risk is, I think, a big part of it. So all these other pieces of the Vision Zero plan, to help support the enforcement of the ordinance, I think are really key. And taking the step back of just repealing the ordinance or, defanging it would be, as members here have all concurred, that's a step back that we just don't want to see. And beyond that, any consistency we can get for this to be outside of just Ann Arbor would obviously be a huge boon, but that's a whole other conversation.
All right.
So as far as the ordinance goes, I think I'm very supportive, especially of the spirit and the intent of a walkable city, downtown especially. I agree with Officer Clock and some of the commentary about safety. And when I think about Vision Zero and the realities and success of actually getting there, I think we have some challenging places that should be considered as exceptional. So for instance, high-capacity transit corridors or four-lane boulevards and expecting cars in all four lanes to stop for a pedestrian entering sometimes sets us up for failure. And I think we've got to take a measured approach. And again, I think the intent makes a lot of sense, but there are areas where it just is very, very dangerous, and I think you have a responsibility to consider the safety of all involved. So I think it needs to be measured approach, and I think there needs to be some exceptions. Again, when we think about this area, a lot of it is we would like less vehicular traffic in our city. When you think about making it possible for people not to drive their cars, you need better transit, not just biking and walking. Well, if you have a corridor with high-capacity transit running, you're stopping a vehicle that may have 60, 80 people that are trying to get somewhere for one pedestrian. And so I think you can think about, well, what makes sense to make this a walkable, less vehicle-centric community? So again, I think it should be a measured approach and consider areas that are just too dangerous to have pedestrians crossing without some kind of controls.
All right.
Thank you. I made a couple of comments at the beginning of the meeting that referred to the fact that citizenship is not a spectator sport. Over the last couple of years, due to the active involvement of many of our citizens, you've seen tremendous improvements in infrastructure. You've seen us, in fact, reallocate budget to make those improvements, and you've seen the police department out doing enforcement both as part of the driving or changing driver behavior study, but also in general in response to concerns. I think those things tend to serve to strip away the excuses. What we're talking about here is basically being the kind of caring community that we say we are. I strongly disagree with Sergeant Clock. I think the fact is that people are driving distracted. They are not, it's a symptom of society. So I do think that if people are driving safely, correct following distances, they're not going to have rear-end collisions. The fact that signage, I think, is pretty consistent, says stop for pedestrians, it sends a pretty clear message as well. That is different than the state statute, but it certainly, as the report says, consistent with communities that put a high value on pedestrian safety. The fact is, as we move forward, whether it's through the A2B Safe campaign, the very strong and improved relationship we have with the Ann Arbor public school systems, with getting messages out through the students, all serve towards the fact that we need to live up to what we say we want to be in terms of a community. The people who commute into the city commute here every day. It's not that hard to get them to get the message as to what expected behavior is here in Ann Arbor. So I'm going to leave this by commending staff for the work they've done over the last couple of years. We have a lot to do, but we are at a point where We need to be engaged. We need to work together. You need to remind us of what we need to do as an organization to push forward and be the safe, walkable, bikeable community we say we want to be. And quite frankly, if that means it's going to take you 30 seconds longer to get somewhere in your car, that's a very small price to pay for being who we say we want to be. I may ask for a minute of privilege here if Nick Hutchinson wants to talk a little bit about, respond to the questions that have been made about pedestrian signage, just so
Okay.
we're talking from a common platform.
I'll take a crack at this here, and if, Luke, if I say anything wrong, please jump in and correct me. The questions about the signage at the crosswalks in terms of stop for pedestrians in crosswalk versus at crosswalk. We're limited in the signs that we can put up by the Michigan Manual of Uniform Traffic Control Devices, so that's why they don't match exactly, because the signs that we have available to us to put in are what is approved in the Michigan Manual. So that explains the inconsistency that you may have seen. We good, Luke? Yeah, okay, thanks.
The last point I want to make also, and it addresses Mr. Dolan's comment, we have a lot of long blocks in the city. We're going to have to put mid-block crossings in where we have 4 lanes, because we all know that people are going across where it's convenient for them, and it's better to put those controls in. And I think we need to address that as well. Finally, I'm reminded of a image somebody from our city attorney's office showed me the other day with a student with his head buried in a book crossing the street and complaints about the student not paying attention. That complaint came from the mid-19th century. This problem has always been with us. We need to address it now because the impacts of crashes and accidents are much greater. But we need our citizens to be actively engaged to help us change the culture and also help provide the direction that they want to go.
Thank you. So I'm wondering if either Chip or Scott would like to make a motion.
I'd make a motion that, that the Transportation Commission recommend to City Council to maintain the crosswalk ordinance in its current iteration based on the review and discussion of the ordinance that we have had and the research that has been done by staff.
This is Robert Gordon. I enthusiastically second that.
All right, then. We have a motion and a second, which is a change in what we planned, which is great. Any discussion on this motion?
Yeah. I just want to make sure that if we want to put out a resolution that we want to keep the language, but I'd also like the opportunity to present recommendations based on all the other materials that there was a lot of feedback about other things, and this is our opportunity to move that forward on that ground.
I agree. So that would be a delayed, we could offer that to them for the January meeting, but have this before the December council meeting.
Yes, in terms of process, I think it's fine for you to move forward on the motion that has been presented, and that could still meet the deadline, the December 18th deadline that was in the resolution. And your other recommendations or findings could be transmitted as a communication item to City Council at a later date.
So we could do that as an amendment to the motion or as a second motion? The maker, yeah.
Is it possible maybe to include follow-up language in a whereas clause, like that we're working on further recommendations as to support the basic resolved clause? Should I explain that?
I'm not sure if it has to be a whereas clause,
Okay.
but we could,
Just an idea.
so my question is, do you want to include that in your motion, Chip, or should we have that as a second motion?
It's friendly amendment.
It's very friendly.
Yep. that's fine to amend the motion.
Okay. Can we state the amendment then? Which would be that we will follow up with other
Yeah,
recommendations.
I'm sorry, I'm
synthesis?
distracted. I'm looking for the original
Resolution?
resolution from council. To see specifically as to what our deliverable was.
Review and policy recommendations.
Howard?
While you're doing that, I am perfectly fine with responding to council that the Transportation Commission is seriously deliberating additional recommendations, and I can notify council by memo that we're going to be a little delayed in meeting the December 18th final date, but I can give them a progress update at that point. So either way the commission would like to go is fine with me. If there's a desire to include it all at once, I can just communicate to council that.
Okay, so in the interest of time, what I'll suggest is that we vote on the original motion and that we have an understanding that there will be additional recommendations and Howard can communicate that. Is that acceptable? Okay, and that Stephanie and I can compile
Yes.
the recommendations and comments and bring them back to this group.
Mhm.
Okay, then let's vote on the motion. Any other discussion? All those in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? We have an unanimous agreement. Thank you. Ad hoc process, that's great. And so we're moving along to a presentation by the DDA. Welcome.
Thank you so much for having us. My name is Susan Pale, and with me is my colleague, Amber Miller. We're going to share a little bit about the DDA. In particular, we're going to talk about our streetscape project, so it's the walkability element of what we work on. Perhaps at a future meeting, we could come back and talk a little bit about some of our other transportation projects, including partnerships with the ATA on Go Passes and our bike projects and so forth. But tonight, we're going to talk about pedestrian improvements. So with that, there we go. So first, a little bit about the DDA. As many of you know, for much of its history, downtown was Main Street for a very long time, and it was in many ways the heart and soul of our community, as it still is, which is fortunate. But like so many communities, our town was affected by the advent of the automobile in the 20s, but more importantly, after the Second World War, automobiles were readily available to just about everyone, and they inundated our community. And at the time, the best thinking was cars could shape the environment because cars gave everybody freedom. We found our downtown fairly devastated, though, as a result, because downtown, which had been the retail core, lost many of its customers, and as unfortunately many of its retailers, to the big malls that built themselves out on a more car-centered part of our cities. There were also, believe it or not, opportunities to devastate even more of the fabric. Fortunately, things like the Beeks Bypass was not built. But there were a lot of car-centric plannings that were done during a period of time. And it led to a lot of devastation downtown. As I mentioned, the retailers, the customers, really the center for being, churches, I mean, all sorts of things moved out to the outskirts where the car could serve them better. In the mid-'70s, the state of Michigan created an enabling language because not only was Ann Arbor devastated, but pretty much every core city in the state, and frankly across the country, communities were struggling to figure out how to resurrect their downtowns. These were centers of blight, centers of crime. They really were about trying to figure out how to take a place that felt obsolete and breathe fresh air into it. State of Michigan, Florida, Colorado, Louisiana, a few other states use DDA mechanisms. And what this is an empowerment from the state that allows a community to set up a district within which we're going to work on some redevelopment activities and within which capture some amount of taxes from new construction. The city of Ann Arbor created our DDA in '83 with the cooperation of the taxing authorities of, at that point, the schools, library, community college, the county. The schools are no longer a part of it, but we still capture taxes from some of the new construction, or some of the taxes from the new construction. But what we're about is a very mission-driven organization. We have our mission up on the wall, and everything we do speaks to this, which is that we're here to strengthen the downtown, and this is the big one, attract new private investment. Because a huge benchmark of success is that tax base. The investment by the private sector is an indication that we're doing our job right. We are working, though, in a way that is an Ann Arbor-centric way of development. The DDA development plan was shaped by the board, approved by City Council in '83, and then amended in '02. And in '02, the amended plan set forward 8 key strategies. The first is identity, that whatever we do, we've got to keep in mind, we've got to reinforce what's special about downtown Ann Arbor. Why are we different than Birmingham or Royal Oak or Livonia? What is special about us? We are to work on infrastructure. You see a lot of our fingerprints on everything from alleys to sidewalks to parking garages. We do a lot with transportation, and as mentioned, maybe we can come back and talk about some of the ways we are working in various transportation modes. We're here to encourage business. That's one of the hardest things to do downtown, and one of the canaries in the coal mine that you look for is a lot of independent retailers. And you can tell in some communities that they're not successfully keeping their retailers afloat. We are looking to find ways to support our businesses. Housing is a key component of this DDA, and from the beginning, it's been a concern about the whole spectrum of housing, not just housing at the market rate and above, but also below market rate for people that work, for all levels of affordability. This is the only DDA that I'm aware of in the state that has regularly, consistently, and very aggressively pursued projects at affordability below market rate. We've spent over $3.5 million over the last 10 years with Avalon, Dawn Farm, and so forth, our Housing Commission, because we see it as a good business, good development practice. Frankly, that's the community that we are about. We work toward development partnerships, so we've done public-private partnerships. We see downtown as a center for a lot of the services downtown. So for instance, the city, the county, AATA, we work to encourage their success downtown, the library and so forth. And this is a DDA that back in '02 established a key component of sustainability, that what we're about as a community is to strive to do what we can to be more sustainable economically, socially, and of course, environmentally. And so that's taken a variety of forms. In fact, last night I was speaking before the Energy Commission about a solar pilot project we're working on. But this is a DDA that gave the grant for solar panels at the farmers market. We are the first community in the United States, and actually the world, that had LED lights, 100% of our downtown. That was a DDA grant. Sustainability is a key component of what we're about. So I'm going to go through my portion of this presentation fairly quickly so we can land on what Amber's going to talk about, which are some of the specific projects that we are working on. We work with a variety of strategies, and we stay with that mission ever most in front of us. For instance, we took over parking in '92 because the system had been deteriorating, and it's a key element to downtown. And we manage it with a demand management approach that has parking pricing and a variety of options available to people. And that's where the Go Pass and bikes and all the others figure in. We've got streetscape planning going on, as I mentioned, a variety of grants. And again, we can talk about some of the other transportation initiatives. We are unique also, I think, among DDAs. There are several that do run parking. We see transportation and parking as intertwined, that parking is just an element in that transportation system. And it's from that vantage point that the dollars made from parking go back into the Go Pass. They go back into the Get Downtown program, the Night Ride, which is a shared taxi service. What we are about is sort of seeing this role of ours, but in an Ann Arbor kind of way. And with that, I'm going to ask Amber to take on maybe just a short overview of our design manual, and from that, our streetscape projects. Oh, and I brought a few copies of this year's State of the Downtown report. It's up on our website. For those that are interested to know a little bit more about the DDA or some of our projects, this is in there, a2dda.org on current projects. But what's as exciting about this is also the statistics about downtown. How many theater seats do we have? Well, 10,000. How many riders did we see on AirRide last year? There were 90,000 going back and forth to the airport. Statistics about crimes, statistics about building permits. It's a really interesting way of understanding what downtown is about, as well as the trends. How many residents do we now have? About 6,600. How many did we have about a decade ago? Maybe about 2,500. So that's a big change but it also talks about future demand. There's still more demand coming. So on our website, I also brought a couple copies if people would like to see it. You know, we'll leave hard copies here. This is for you.
So as Susan mentioned, I'm going to briefly walk through a number of our transportation projects, and we hope to come back at a later date and talk in more detail. I'll start with our Downtown Street Design Manual, which was an effort that we began in 2013. Our board knew that we wanted to take on a series of street improvement projects, and we needed a tool to help guide those improvements. There are ever-increasing demands on downtown streets and sidewalks, and we know that not every street can serve these demands equally, so we were looking for a tool that would help us to prioritize improvements. We also wanted to address some missed opportunities and key issues downtown and improve some of the collaboration between agencies. So we pulled together a core staff team made up of a large number of city staff. So it was a cross-unit city staff team and cross-agency involving the DDA and the RIDE as well, involving a number of people that are in this room today. That core staff team oversaw the process. There's a great deal of public input. We also looked to the approved plans and pulled together goals to help guide the manual. And what we came up with was really the importance of context in street design, particularly in the downtown, and that we need to be looking at both function and context when we approach street design, and that those two things together can form a street type that guides improvements. In the downtown, we understand that everybody is a pedestrian at some point in their trip, so all streets need to emphasize pedestrians and make sure that they feel safe and comfortable. And then beyond that, streets may have different level of emphasis. This is the frontage context and the function that we landed on. And so these two things together in different combinations make up street type. And then this map that is too complicated to discuss in detail today shows those street types throughout the downtown. And then along with that framework map is this chart, which lays out the street types and which types of improvements are required, recommended, opportunity, or restricted to help guide a project. And this is available on our website. I believe that Kayla provided a link to this document.
It was in your homework, in the homework guide.
The manual was adopted in 2015. It's now city standard and applies to all public and private projects that impact the streets downtown. We also have a compilation of best practice findings to help guide some policy decisions, and that core staff team continues to meet to help move these goals forward. So once that was complete, we started moving towards implementing a series of street improvements. I believe that you have this map at your seats in paper form, and I'll talk through a couple of these projects just briefly. Our first street improvement after that manual was adopted was the South University improvement on South U between East University and Washtenaw. This is one of those core commercial destination streets in downtown. And so aside from addressing much needed maintenance, we really focused on making the sidewalks more comfortable. We were able to widen the sidewalks, open them up, improve the seating, and also shorten some of the crossing distances. Construction on this project just wrapped in the last month or so. For about the past 2 years, we've been planning and designing the Fifth Avenue and Detroit Street improvements. This is a collaborative project between the DDA and the city. This is also a destination commercial area, but it doesn't really feel like one. The function of the street wasn't really matching the context here. Luckily, with a complete reconstruction, we were able to really rethink the layout of this street. Aside from the maintenance concerns, it became clear pretty quickly that the that crossing the street was one of the primary concerns.
And it's near a high school.
Yes, so, and with the farmer's market and community high school, this was a key concern of ours as well. So among the established project goals, safety was a top priority, and it really helped to shape this project. Here is a bird's eye view of the conceptual layout. You can see,
Why don't you orient them to the
yeah, I
streets
can
and
see
stuff?
Kingsley here, Fifth Avenue, Detroit Street, and then Catherine on the southern end. So as you can see from this image, we were able to shorten all of the crossing distances. And then one of the key features is this pedestrian median in the center here. And what that does is help the street feel nice and narrow as cars are moving through so that cars slow down. And it also helps the pedestrian to be very visible at the curb and visible as they cross the street. Here is just another view looking south and giving you a sense of how we are repurposing this street space. We were able to reduce the vehicle lanes, add some width to the east side of the street, or the sidewalk, reduce the crossing distance, and then widen the bike lane adjacent to the parked cars. Here's another view looking south, so you can get a sense of how we are able to, or how we intend to reduce that crossing distance. So looking forward, we have a few projects that we've just begun design on. This is the Huron Street project from 3rd to Division. With this project, we will again be focusing on pedestrian comfort and safety as they walk along the corridor and as they cross the corridor. And we are also looking to improve transit access along the corridor. We're also taking, or we will be taking a close look at First and Ashley Streets and the possibility of converting these back to two-way traffic. We're also interested in implementing some of the on-street portions of the tree line trail in these corridors. And then lastly, we are looking at William Street for a protected bike lane. So as we said, we're going to run through it very briefly, but we hope to come back, and if you have any questions, I think we have a few minutes.
Just a quick question. I was wondering, what is the status of the fencing on the parking garages?
So as of the end of last week, 5 of the 6 garages had fencing completely installed, and we're underway at the Forest Garage.
Are those temporary or those?
These are temporary. Our intent is to have a rebidding of the permanent fencing sometime in the next couple years. But in the interim, we're going to be working our way down the garages, level 7, 6, 5, and get done what we can this fiscal year and then continue next year, probably to level 3.
Any other questions? Thank you, and we hear that you
thank
want to
you.
come back.
Appreciate it.
So
Appreciate
thank
the
you very much.
opportunity.
All right. So we'll change the slides for Robert Hamilton to do a presentation.
Hampshire.
Hampshire, I'm sorry. Welcome.
Keyboard or the mouse? Yeah.
Thank you. So I'm going to give you guys a quick presentation about parking, one of my favorite topics. Hopefully, probably a topic of the Transportation Commission. So I'll try to do this in about 10 minutes or so. Is that how much time I have? About 5 minutes, 10 minutes?
And allocated a total of 20 minutes on the agenda to include time for discussion. So if you can present in 10 to 15 minutes,
Okay,
that will
I'll
leave a
keep
few
it
minutes
short.
for any questions.
So this is, so I'm a professor at the University of Michigan Transportation Research Institute. And what I'm going to talk about is some joint work with colleagues. One, Rachel Weinberger, who was actually at Nelson Nygaard at the time that this work was done. And another colleague, Adam Miller-Ball, who's a professor at UC Santa Cruz. So title of the talk is Parking Search Cause Congestion. Where is all the fuss? So So some may know Donald Shoup, who I think is a godfather of parking. So he had an op-ed in the New York Times now about 10 years ago that was advocating using demand-based pricing for parking, and that the amount of time that people spend looking for parking is exorbitant. The amount of pollution generated, the amount of congestion generated is out of control. The number of crashes associated with people parking is enormous. And one of his countermeasures was to use demand-based pricing. So this is using price to coordinate supply and demand. And at that time, that op-ed was actually based on scientific research that he had done and others in the academic community to try to measure the impact of people looking for parking. So they measure, congestion, pollution, and so forth. So I won't go in a lot of detail, but it's sort of documented that there's large impacts on cities and citizens of people because of people looking for parking. And in his book called The High Cost of Free Parking, actually recommend that highly. He did a meta survey of studies that have looked at in various cities throughout the years of how many people are actually looking for parking and how long it takes. And the bottom line number there is 34%. And there's actually a folklore that 30% of people in central business districts are looking for somewhere to park. And you might hear that repeated over and over. But there's no evidence for that. There's a bunch of individual studies that have investigated it. So what we wanted to do is really try to understand what fraction of people are actually looking or cruising for a parking space. So this work was actually funded by the Federal Highways Administration, a two-phase project. So there's quite a bit of federal resources that went into this project, and excited to kind of give you guys some of the results. And so what we did to understand how people are looking for parking, how much extra mileage, pollution is generated, is actually we were able to obtain GPS traces of people driving. Okay, so at UMTRI, the Transportation Research Institute where I work, there's a very large naturalistic driving experiment that's been going on for about 5 years, maybe about 6 years now, where members of the ARbor community have signed up to put equipment in their vehicles, cameras. Let me back up. Put equipment in their vehicles related to safety. So there's been about 3,000 of those people who are part of this large experiment in the area. And some subset of those couple thousand people have video cameras in their cars as well. And so from those sets of users, we can actually track their trips in Ann Arbor, GPS straight. So we get GPS data from them 10 times per second. So we know exactly where these people are and how they drive. And also, for comparison, we obtained data in San Francisco of the same type, of the same nature. So these are GPS data from people driving. And there, we're going to use this. We have, for over a month, about 170,000 trips in San Francisco. And so what we've done is analyze those GPS data to understand the patterns by which people are driving and looking for parking. So I'll just give you guys this quickly. So actually, if you think about it, every time you drive your car, it has to end parked somewhere, first of all. And then secondly, unless you're dropping someone off, but every trip ends with a parked car. And if you think about it, you always search for a parking space, unless you have like an assigned spot. Unless you have an assigned space, you always search for parking. But what we're interested in is excessive searching for parking. Okay, so we have a definition of what excessive search for parking is. And that's basically that you went beyond 200 meters beyond the shortest path. So we look at where your origin, your destination, and if you deviated by more than 200 meters, we say that you were excessively searching. So just quickly, so this is an example. So the star is where the person ultimately parked. And so what we do is we draw a 400-meter boundary around it. And when the vehicle enters that boundary, then we compute the shortest path from where they enter to the star. And if the person, the path they drove is longer than 200 meters, longer than that shortest distance, we say you were searching for parking. So that's sort of our definition for what cruising is. So just give you that as a backdrop. Let me just move past these. And so I'll just give you the quick answer right away, and then I'll show you some maps and some more data about this. So what we have, the tree, or the University of Michigan data that is based in Ann Arbor. So in the column under tree, if you look under the highlighted area, what we computed is the percentage of trips. These are all downtown, by the way. Oh, sorry, no. This is all of Ann Arbor. That roughly 5.8% of all trips, in this case, it's about 13,500 trips that we started with. About 5.8% of those had to search excessively to find a parking spot. Okay, and that contributed, on average, an excess of about, as I said, there's about 548 meters of excess driving. If you did have to search for parking, you had to, on average, you searched for about 548 meters in Ann Arbor. And if you see in San Francisco that the percentage of trips that were cruising actually was lower than in Ann Arbor. It was 4.9%. Okay, so one sort of quick takeaway is like, well, maybe Ann Arbor might be a little bit more difficult to park in than San Francisco, which is maybe counterintuitive to some, but the results are leaning that direction. And the other thing to look at is that this is much less than 30% that's often cited by others in the literature, consulting companies, and so forth. Now, this is averaged over all trips, all time periods, all times of the day. So what we can do is, certainly there are times when it's very difficult to search for parking in Ann Arbor area. We all know that. And so I can show you a little bit more about that. So let's just do, so this graph here actually shows the temporal patterns by time of day. So we looked at weekdays. So this is an average over a weekday. And what you can see is, if we look at the red curve at the top, these are the fraction of trips that contain cruising, okay? And the red is Ann Arbor. The blue is the average over all of San Francisco. So what you can see there is basically, over all time periods, there's basically a peak of about 12 to 15% of all trips will have to look for somewhere to park. Okay, but you notice that you'll see a temporal pattern. Of course, in the middle of the night, okay, we're not getting a lot of cruising in the middle of the night for Ann Arbor. Yeah, exactly. But then you see with the party time in the Mission District at night, you can see, so we just broke out the Mission District just as a comparison case. You can see that there's neighborhood variation in this and temporal variation. And the bottom graph just is a similar time scale, but just the extra distance you had to travel to find a parking spot. So that's sort of a temporal breakdown. And let me just give you guys a couple of, so this is this sort of spatial distribution. So this is San Francisco. The way you look at this graph, this map, is that the color, so the darker the color, So the dark color means that of all the trips that terminated in that location, what percentage of them cruised for parking? Okay, so the darker the color, that means where they ultimately parked. It may not be where they intended to park. It's just where they ultimately found a parking spot. What fraction of those people had to look or search around excessively to find a space? Okay, and so you see there is variation. There's certainly dark areas that more than 30% of the trips there, people had to circle around pretty excessively to find a parking spot. And so this is sort of another definition of cruising, which is the amount of times that people had to repeat the same block. This is kind of like measuring how much people are circling around. That's also San Francisco. I won't dwell too much on that one. But now we're sort of getting into Ann Arbor. So this is a similar picture. For the Ann Arbor data, first let me say that the gray areas were areas where we didn't have enough data to make a prediction. So not enough trips terminated at those locations. Okay, and so you guys have it there on your screen so you can see it up close. But this is, as you can see, some spatial variation, and you're getting a lot of, what this picks up is actually downtown you're getting some of the usual suspects that you think would be cruising, but what also comes up is that there's a lot of like schools. This is Ann Arbor. You're getting a lot of cruising around schools. That's probably parents picking up kids and so forth. You're getting a lot, and some commercial districts as well outside of downtown. I can take questions on this later if you guys want to discuss it. And so this is more citywide. That same picture. And again, the gray just means that we didn't have enough data to make any predictions. And so let me just zoom into a couple. I zoomed into a couple places that were actually popping up really red. Like, what are these really dark red places in Ann Arbor? So let me just move ahead a little bit. So here's another rendering of this map. This is downtown. The darker, this might be a little bit harder to see, but the darker the color means that the harder it is to park in those areas. And the green dots are actual data points of trips that terminated there. Okay, so this is downtown. Let me just zoom in on a couple places that sort of pop out as really difficult. So this is actually by ISR, the Institute of Social Research, by the Cube. And so this is on campus, right adjacent to campus. And this area, just right in the center, the really dark one, turned out to be extremely difficult. For those people who eventually parked there, I think over 70% of the people had to circle around to find. Now, that could be because of the land use. There's some one-way streets there as well next to it, so the urban form and the way the streets are laid out also have an impact on this as well. So that's one really hot area downtown. This was actually an area out in the suburb. This was actually a church parking lot. I got to get the exact. I can get the exact name for you, but there were areas outside of the core downtown areas that really have lots of parking issues, and this was a church parking lot. I mean, an area around this church was very showed a lot of parking difficulties. So maybe I'll just stop here on this slide. So again, I think one of the surprising things that came out of this was, one, that the amount of overall so-called cruising that we found was dramatically lower than what many quote, and that the amount of cruising in Ann Arbor and San Francisco were actually so comparable. I would, beforehand, I would have maybe thought, oh, San Francisco is much more difficult to find a parking spot than Ann Arbor. Now, a couple caveats about the work. The Ann Arbor data set, those are people who are residents in this area. So they live in the Ann Arbor area. So it doesn't say much about the visitors. So the experience of visitors is not quite captured here, which, could, I think people who live here in the area kind of know where they like to park. Creatures of habit, they probably can go there directly. Maybe there's some searching, but I imagine a visitor's experience might be different. The San Francisco data, the right-hand side column is all. That includes visitors and people who live there, so it's slightly different population. So I'll stop there, and I don't know if there's questions.
Thank you. Any questions or comments?
Yeah, so I know you say that the cruising level is lower than this 34% that is often cited. However, I'm wondering, like, these data points, these seem to be all over the cities versus, like, isn't that 34% supposed to be for, like, downtown areas?
Yeah. So
I'm wondering, like, what it would look like if we just looked at downtown areas, like.
Yeah, so some of the maps, they actually show you can see a zoom in of downtown to see what those numbers are in downtown. So I mean, some areas are comparable to 30%, but many aren't. From the maps that I showed about downtown Ann Arbor.
Robert, how does this relate to the demand-based pricing? Is it the areas that 30% cruising, which should be priced higher?
Yeah, so that's a good question. So part of the backstory is that my research group was involved in a program called SF Park, which was a $20 million federally funded project in San Francisco to reduce congestion caused by cruising. And that program ran for about 6 years now. We changed the price of parking. So we ripped out the traditional meters, put smart meters in to about 20,000 parking spaces in downtown. That's the core of San Francisco. And every 6 weeks, we changed the price of parking based on the performance of those assets during the previous 6 weeks. So areas that were overutilized, we increased the price by 1/4. And then areas that were underutilized, we decreased the price by 1/4. And so every 6 weeks for the last 5 years, this has been going on. And so, yeah, Steve, so part of this is that certainly areas that have lots of cruising are related to areas that have high parking occupancy. So in San Francisco, those are the areas that we increase the prices. So I have other slides about that, but so that's part of the story, that basically when you're cruising looking for parking, you're basically imposing externalities on other drivers. Actually, when you're parked, you're also imposing externalities on other drivers because you're parked and they have to search around looking for spaces, congesting the roads, using their gas, potentially causing accidents, and so forth. So the parked cars are actually imposing a tax on other people who are driving. So what we try to do in San Francisco is to price that into the cost of parking. So,
Yeah, I guess my follow-up question to your presentation is I'm trying to understand what the impetus for this type of analysis would be, I guess maybe in the Ann Arbor context. Is it to see where dynamic pricing can work? Is it to see where, do we not have enough parking? So we look at the statistic. Are our streets too congested with people cruising for parking? And is a 6% cruising number even bad? Like, I just don't understand.
At the context, You know, so part of the, I'm not going to make any policy recommendations necessarily, just presenting this data, that anecdotal stories from individuals, you'll get certainly their personal experiences, which may or may not be related to what's happening overall in the system. So people who can't, certainly there are people who, in the data, that it took them, a half hour to find parking in Ann Arbor, just circling around and around and around. But when you look at the modal experience of the driver, that's not it. So when you're thinking about policy, you know, are you designing for, you know, average kind of performers or the outliers? So this is kind of part of an exploration to understand how cruising could impact the roads here in Ann Arbor. So there's no clear policy recommendation out at this point from me. I mean, but this is just data about how the city's operating. Yeah. And I'll just say this, in other cities, this is important in the fact that in the federal government, because there's, you know, this is potentially linked with congestion and pollution in urban cores. And also, I'll just taking another step back, it has to do with economic development and vitality of an area. Because often, when you say, or we're going to say increase prices of parking on street, that can scare business owners whose shops are right in front of that parking. And so this is an issue that cities around the U.S. have been grappling with and needing input, data like this to help them make decisions.
We have a few more minutes for other questions? Yeah.
I just want to support my fellow commissioner in saying, I don't really think we should focus on the average of the 5.8 because it's like completely irrelevant what's happening in a neighborhood where everyone has a driveway versus downtown. But it seems like if you look at the red hot spots, the schools and the hospital and the university centers are hot spots.
Right.
So it seems like we want to be addressing those things. One reason I think the schools are hot spots is because people don't feel safe letting their kids walk or bike to school. So virtually every parent is driving their kid alone in their car to school. And the ability to transfer to schools on the other side of town exacerbates that. So I think some of the things we're trying to do to improve safety around schools can help that situation. If people feel like it's safe, they're more likely to let their kid walk or bike, and they're less likely to be in their individual car. But I hope the university is doing some things also to increase, like the satellite parking lots, or things that can allow people to leave their car outside. It was my understanding, Steve, maybe you know, that for example, the satellite parking lot on Plymouth by the highway was underutilized, or maybe at some point we should discuss what we can do more to prevent people from trying to drive straight to the hospital, which those ramps fill up by 8 a.m.
That's right.
So people, that causes a lot of congestion. It seems like something that we should re-up our efforts.
In Pittsburgh, where I was before, we certainly had an effort to do parking rides. So basically, you park in satellite parking lots and then have shuttles into the business districts. And sometimes people like those, sometimes they don't, but it can certainly help the congestion issue to get into the business district.
Yeah.
So I just had one question that has to do with the dynamic pricing. In San Francisco, at the SF Park program, change price every 6 weeks.
6 weeks, yeah.
That might cause people's heads to explode here.
Yeah.
How do you do that?
Yeah,
Is
so-
it just when somebody gets to the smart meter, they type it in and it's a quarter different? Or?
That's a good question. So actually, there was a very large public outreach campaign. Large billboards throughout the city, things in the San Francisco Chronicle to sort of announce this program, and there were ways for citizens to become aware of those price changes. And, you know, typically people don't know how much they pay for parking, particularly on street. Last time you parked on street, do you know how much you paid per hour?
Yeah, it was free because it was after 6 o'clock.
After 6 o'clock. That could be part of the problem as well. But we'll leave that for something. That's a problem.
Serious?
Yeah, thank you for the presentation, and I think it points to a lot of interesting data. I mean, a lot of questions come out of it, obviously, in terms of, Ann Arbor's probably not as bumping as the Mission, but there probably is a correlation for downtown Ann Arbor versus the city of Ann Arbor citywide, as Stephanie and Tim have mentioned. But, to me, I view this as an asset that I hope the university, the city, the Downtown Development Authority, hopefully we're taking advantage of that because, you know, we set, you said you're not necessarily in here to make policy recommendation. That's all fine, but there are people in this room who are set to do that, and I really hope that this data source is used to do that. You know, we're talking about investing millions of dollars to increase parking, and we don't necessarily, it does seem like, you know, it's not always clear to me how much that's based on data versus, you know, softer data. You know, we've commissioned studies in the past. Nelson Nygaard, you know, did a parking management study, and it seemed like one of the conclusions was that parking downtown is largely a question of management. And this seems like the kind of data that could help, you know, suss that out. So, you know, before the city goes around spending millions of dollars to say we need to do X or Y to parking to increase it or to move it or to increase the price or go past 6 o'clock, you know, this is a really valuable data set that I think a lot more could be done with. So,
I mean, I just want to thank the city because, I mean, these data are yours, the cities and the citizens, because this is part of a program called Safety Pilot that was directed by someone named Jim Sayer, who's the director of the University of Michigan Transportation Research Institute. And the city of Ann Arbor has been a great partner in that program. So these data are sort of derived from that collaboration. So.
Two things briefly, and forgive me if this first one is obvious, but the metric, the 200-meter metric, is always consistent across past reports and this one?
Yes.
Okay. And then briefly, and you said there is a separate data set if you zoom into downtown Ann Arbor. Do you have those numbers in this report?
No, the numbers I report here are at the aggregate, the maps. The maps are, you can see by geographic location, but I can get those for anyone who wants to see them.
I think we'd all be interested in the downtown numbers. Right?
Great.
I think, I was going to say one thing that might be interesting to see, I mean, I don't know, like if you were to look in this in conjunction with transit data to see what areas have lots of cruising and that maybe might not have as much transit service, like see like where people are taking transit, and you'll see like there might be a big demand for parking in an area and lots of transit riders going to that area, and there might be another area where there's a big demand for parking and there's not many transit riders going, or which might be because the service there is just does not run late enough, does not run frequent enough, or is circuitous routing.
I think that's a good idea as well. So.
I saw a question from Scott.
So with the San Francisco study that you worked on, did you have an impact on cruising as measured? Or?
Yeah, okay. Yeah. So roughly about 45% decrease in cruising over, that was a 3-year time window from the beginning of the program to the end.
So putting that in like concrete, like say sustainability impact terms, do you have a sense of like what that would entail in terms of like greenhouse gas emissions or something like that?
So one number is, something that's quantifiable is that roughly people were cruising, the average person, about 4 city blocks, and it came down to like 2.
Okay.
So like half. I don't know.
So you could probably do that math if you
we can,
backed
we
it
have
out.
we have the VMT calculation, and then.
And did this study, or are you familiar with any other studies that have looked at impact on retail business in particular? Because as you mentioned, like that's a huge fear with on-street parking and retailers. So I'm curious.
Yeah, there's an official evaluation of the program, it's called SF Park evaluation. I can send it to Kyla. Maybe I can send it to you. There's an official evaluation of the program that has tax receipts and sales in the areas that had price changes and what the impact was for.
Yeah, because I'm sure that kind of data is really interesting, and I've seen similar kinds of things done with like bicycle lanes replacing street parking, and you hear the same concerns, and it often turns out that the retailers do better. So it's not yet. So the fears can hopefully be allayed a little bit with data if the data supports it. Thank you.
So we're out of time on this item, but if there's any pressing questions remaining? Okay,
Thank you. All right, thanks.
thank you for coming. Good, then we'll move on to the updates on transportation.
So for my updates, highlighting from the transportation project updates, some items to highlight different from last month in particular. Under the construction projects category, at the time of year, mid-November, things definitely wind down on street and sidewalk repairs, so those projects are pretty well completed for this year. And one item to note, and as Commissioner Parsons mentioned in terms of RFBs compared to the map, it's described there's 4 RFBs that still do need to go in and are planned to go in yet this year. Fall does actually extend a bit into December, and we need the equipment to come in, so they are targeted to get done. So that map could be probably more accurately to be completed in fall, would probably be it. So we're still looking to get those in. A project in the design and planning that's been of interest to the Commission, the Pauline Boulevard water main replacement project and then resulting resurfacing. Just want to highlight in that update includes the matter that the direction of the design is heading towards buffered bike lanes, both sides, with removal of parking from one side of the street. So where that project is at right now is staff is out gathering feedback from the citizens, the residents that directly front and will be impacted by that to help shape the direction of how that parking is laid out. And as that would result in removal of more than one block of on-street parking, that's an item that would have to go to City Council for action. And so that would be something that would anticipate coming back through the Commission for your recommendation, policy recommendation to City Council as to how to act on that. So there'll be more to come on that in the coming months. Also in planning and design, an update, it's a quick number, but an important number in the Allen Creek berm opening project. Design is moving forward, that the design plans are at about 90% level, so that is definitely coming into shape. And a key piece with that project includes a grant fund application that we've made through the DNR Trust Fund, where that funding would go towards the pedestrian portion of that. And we had the opportunity to refine our application. We were contacted by DNR staff, and they gave us some suggestions after a preliminary review of our application. We added some things to it, bumped up our score, and so we expect to hear in early December. So hopefully by next commission meeting, we may actually have some specific news as to whether we got that funding or not for that project. And then in the last section of the report, other updates and information. The Ann Arbor Station project, folks were updated on meeting to go and acted on that. The environmental assessment review was held and the period closed on November 2nd. So we received approximately 100 comments from the community in response to that environmental assessment. So right now, the project team is going through those comments and developing responses to incorporate within the document. And I'm going to circle back and leave at the end the driver behavior study. We've got a press release, so I'll give Sergeant Clark an opportunity for that. But to finish my part, the State Street Corridor, Transportation Corridor Study, direct you to that and that update. We completed that project in terms of its recommendations with a public meeting held on November 2nd where we had approximately 30 people attend a couple of sessions. And actually, maybe I won't steal Eli's thunder. I'll let him mention one thing that happened at that meeting when he said was perhaps a first at a public meeting he'd been at. So if you want to share with that, Eli, I found that very interesting.
So the project is taking the 1970s design auto-centric facility and converting it to a 21st century multimodal with buffered bike lanes and sidewalks and crosswalks. At the end of the first hour, when we ended the first presentation, there was actually a round of applause by those who were in attendance. So the public really embraced the ideas in the plan. Thanks for the opportunity to restate that.
That's right, yes. It's not often that us staff at those sorts of meetings actually get a round of applause from the participants. That's always good to report. And so with that, Sergeant Clark, don't know if you would like to speak to the press release and the update on the driver behavior study.
We did finish our changing driver behavior enforcement phase last Friday. We did have some weather issues due to the way the project is set up. We couldn't do 3 of the 16 enforcement details. They're based on, obviously, dry roadways for stopping distances. The officers did stop another 224 cars, which throughout the 4 separate details, including the warning phase, we did stop 2,311 violators and subsequently issued just over 700 tickets for the fail to yield under the city ordinance. Anything?
Very good.
anything
And I
else?
guess
Any
the
questions
other
I can
piece
answer?
from the press release itself, that besides just the actual tickets and enforcement, but the actual behavior that's being exhibited and documented.
The Western Michigan University is doing the study part of the compliance rates, and those are at areas that we were not a part of, the police were not at. And I think that latest figure was up to 63% compliance.
Yep. Yeah, actually, the press release here was 27 to 58, but yes, actually,
Yesterday, I think I
it's
saw
actually
63.
increased, yes, I believe to 63% was the last I saw, so. Some improvement numbers.
I just have a quick question. I'm never sure when they take the measurements, is it always a time when the police are there? Like, do they ever do the measurement with the person standing there and a clipboard person is writing down the stoppage, or is it always when they're there giving the citations?
Not sure, Sergeant Clark, if you're.
Might be a little confused about what you're asking. The percentage that they're showing on the signs,
Yeah.
we are not at those locations. They're just somebody watching compliance that's affiliated with the university. The stuff that where we're at is strictly enforcement. They're not, those numbers are not going into that, right?
Yep.
Do you have a feel for what percentage of the violations you issued are people with Ann Arbor addresses?
Tough question for me to answer since I wasn't at all of them. But the ones I particularly dealt with, most of them were Ann Arbor addresses.
So that would speak against the argument that the problem with the crosswalk ordinance and other enforcement is it's people who commute as opposed to people who live here.
Couldn't argue that.
So part of the argument is the old expression, we've met the enemy and he is us.
In my 15 years as a traffic officer prior to being promoted, most of the people I stopped on complaints in neighborhoods and that were people who lived in that area or that was their normal commute to work or school or whatever.
I think that speaks back towards the need for education as well. And people reminding their neighbors of how to behave, just as part of that campaign.
And then, just as an item outside of the report document itself, it's under the agenda as a staff report, just to give a bit of explanation. It was explained in your homework packet, but for people that may be watching or looking on the agenda online and wondering why there's an open meetings and records for boards commission item tonight, what that is this was an item that Ms. Kayla and I and best decipher was distributed to the commission early on as we were in our education and early forming stages and was in the Legistar system, but it was pointed out by the city clerks, was never directly attached, so it's kind of floating out there, and this way it's there for the public record. So that way if anyone down the road is looking for that item through the Legistar system, now they'll be able to get it now that it's attached to this agenda. So that was the purpose for that.
And it was also timely with some questions that had come in recently about the Open Meetings Act, so I think it's a good refresher. If you have questions, maybe take a look at that, see if that helps clarify, and let us know if you have other questions.
Very good. Yep. Thank you very much.
5 minutes for any liaison reports for those who are representing the organization.
So yesterday, Planning Commission had a work session where we began discussing the CIP for the year. So we haven't yet had the public hearing to vote on that. So there's more to follow. But we did receive the Transportation Commission comments, and along with that came a memo from staff breaking out what from those recommendations could be implementable this fall for the current iteration of the CIP, what they felt like was doable, and the next iteration next fall with the big plan, with a couple of other comments. So just to very quickly summarize, this fall they felt like we could, if Planning Commission recommends it and Council ultimately accepts it, the safe routes to school labeling we could definitely make clear in the CIP. And moving the 7th Street project from other to alternative transportation. And then for the other recommendations were really pushed to the next CIP round, which includes recategorizing alternative transportation into active and transit, which I think there's a lot of support for, but it's just complicated to do. The bicycle network project, sidewalks with stairs, and Washington Street Bicycle Boulevard. So those are the things that staff feels like could more easily be accommodated in the next cycle. And then we had some discussion on how to think about the design considerations with the emphasis on safety and encouraging safe behavior through design, and to what degree we can use the CIP to enforce those goals and values. But I'll say, generally speaking from the conversation, all of the recommendations were pretty well received, and we'll be looking at figuring out how to roll those in, I expect. But I'll come back after planning talks about it and we make our recommendations to council. So thank you all.
So this is getting down in the weeds, but there was some emphasis earlier about data, and data. So there was a meeting on Monday. SEMCOG released their 2045 population, household, and employment forecast for public review. Those data are fundamentally important because those are input parameters that go into transportation demand forecasting and support all projects that will come forward for federal funding over the next 3 to 5 years. The interesting finding out of taking a first look at the data as they released it is the city of Ann Arbor is forecasting to have both substantial employment growth over the next 25 years, as well as substantial population growth, which this is the third round these forecasts are produced for long-range transportation planning processes every 4 or 5 years. This is the third time that I've had the opportunity to review or be present when they were released. And historically, so back in 2005, the initial forecast was, well, Ann Arbor's been a sleepy, stable community, and we persuaded SEMCOG at that time to acknowledge the growth that we were beginning to see as we came into the 21st century. That growth has continued, and their forecasts are now, I think, doing a better job of reflecting the experience that we're actually seeing. But for those of you who would be interested, it's available on the SEMCOG website, and you could copy me on any comments that you might want to share with SEMCOG so that we can have the benefit of your view of that information. Thank you.
I just received a note from CTN. I want to remind all commissioners to please turn on your mics when you're speaking. I think some recent comments were not recorded into the feed. So I know we're wrapping up, but for any final items.
Any other reports from commissioners? All right, then we move into next agenda items. Are there any next? Kayla's got a few.
I have a
Anything
couple. If commissioners want to raise any that they have on their mind first, we can do that.
All right, so we must be doing an okay job.
Okay. So I guess a couple of points. I think that by the December 20th meeting, we should have a calendar together for you all so that we can establish your meeting dates for 2018. Because the calendar that you approved at your February meeting was only setting through this December 20th meeting. So plan for that. We'll also be working on a draft work plan for 2018 and hope to have something by December for the commission to react to. Couple of other items that will be coming related to the work plan. One announcement is that the CIP committee is going to meet on December 8th to review major street to take a look at the CIP and what major street projects coming up that they would be interested in the commission looking at. So plan to hear back from the CIP committee at the December 20th meeting about that, and those will hopefully be wrapped into the work plan by that point. So what we had planned in our work plan for the December meeting is a transportation plan update, talking about the RFP scope of work for the transportation plan update. Perhaps Commissioner Cooper, I will put him on the spot and just, if he has anything to add about the status of transportation plan update, is that anticipated for December or not?
Still anticipated for December.
Okay. Thank you. A couple of other items that had been bumped from earlier agendas that we may need to, we'll see if we can work into December, if not, plan them for the 2018 work plan, was an ARbor Airport informational discussion about an overview, that being part of our overall transportation system. Some maybe touching on upcoming projects with the airport. Is the commission generally still interested in hearing about the airport as a brief informational item on a future agenda? Okay.
Mild enthusiasm.
Okay. And then transportation system operations and maintenance was another item that had been suggested in a future agenda. It hasn't yet made it, but is that still something that we're interested in hearing about? If so, and also with that one, could anyone, if you have thoughts now that you'd like to elaborate on what you're really looking for in terms of operations and maintenance, or if you want to think a little more about that and for the next call for agenda items, I think it would be helpful for staff if there were perhaps a little more input from the commission on what would be helpful for you. Something to think about. We did specifically receive sort of a suggested agenda item from Councilmember Warpahowski, suggesting that the Transportation Commission might look at consistency of clearing, or inconsistency of clearing on sidewalks and curb ramps, so related to winter maintenance. Is this a topic that the Transportation Commission would be interested in discussing on a future agenda?
We mentioned it last time in the context of the Pedestrian Safety and Access Task Force as well.
Okay, not hearing any objections, so. I guess,
Okay.
is that a yes? Okay, that's yes.
We'll work out the timing, because
Yeah, we'll need to look at the work plan and see where it's going to fit in. Linda, Diane, and I can coordinate on that. Then one other item, I just wanted to follow up with Commissioner Preston, because you had specifically reached out about upcoming agenda item related to South State area. So I know that there were public meetings dedicated specifically to the South State Street corridor study, and the Transportation Commission was invited to attend those. If there is an interest in further discussion about that project at a commission meeting, please let us know.
Well, that's a separate issue. I went to that meeting.
Okay.
And that's about the section from like the mall or just above the mall to past the highway. And what I was talking about was from the top of that project north. So it would be fine and nice maybe for the commission to see the South State project, because it has issues with, it has like a whole explanation for how they worked in the bike lanes and the pedestrian crosswalks and to minimize crashes and increase safety and make it more accessible. So it might be a nice thing for the commission to have a short presentation on, but the issue I originally wanted to discuss at some point was how to make the southern part below Stadium more accessible to people moving east to west.
Okay.
Okay. So you noted
And that, so I think that area of South Ann Arbor access that you had raised fits well with the transportation plan update. That will be an opportunity to talk about broader connectivity issues. So I think we'll anticipate it, we'll plan it for when we talk through the transportation plan update, and if it needs to be pulled out as a separate discussion, we'll look for that opportunity. But I think if you have outstanding concerns in one more dedicated agenda time for that, then please raise that.
Okay. All right. Anything else?
That's all.
Then I should announce that our next meeting is Wednesday, December 20th at 7 PM right here. Hopefully we'll get a nice turnout again. Let Kayla know if you'll be unable to attend, please. And if there are no objections, then I'll adjourn the meeting. We are adjourned.
Thank you.